Hey, so first of all, thank you for coming on to join me on the show today. I do appreciate that.
Yeah, gosh, what a huge honor to be here. What a wonderful studio you've got. And
Yeah.
yeah, excited to dive right in.
And just so you know, today, it's not about me. I want to understand.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm serious. I want to understand about the Well Done Foundation. I want to understand the elements of your impact, the impetus for what you're doing, and what you are collecting and what you want to do going forward. Okay.
Sure.
So we'll
Absolutely.
go over these things.
Mhm.
I know you'd asked me like, hey, is there something we're going to read before the show so I can understand what's going on? It's like, no, we're going to do this off the cuff.
I was really looking forward to the Between Two Ferns type.
I can go find one. I'll go pull one out of the ground outside. I'll bring it in here.
Have you ever seen that show?
Absolutely.
Oh, gotta
So
love that.
funny.
Oh my God.
He kills me when he does that. I'm surprised the guests he gets on there are just like staggering.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then, obviously they're kind of prepped for that.
Yeah.
But, no, all good stuff, man.
No, the orange is cool. Is this so? Just so I know, is this a new safety thing?
It is, so we, obviously at Well Done Foundation, all about the brand, all about the first impression.
Mm-hmm.
These are FRs, so flame resistant, everything that our field teams wear
Very cool.
are safety oriented. We'd been in some other colors in the past. And actually what it was is I was in Hobbs and we were looking for some new uniform pieces, and I saw these orange shirts like this, and it's like, well, nobody else is wearing those.
Oh, orange is great.
And I'm like, sign me up, man. So anyway, this is the new program for us going forward, and I mean, again, so you sort of have to be careful around the work release folks, but
sure.
No, I mean, so it's
that way you're like, oh, are you supposed to be out here? You know what I mean? I thought you were supposed to be behind the fence.
Right. Yeah. No. So it's a good look. It's definitely unique, and it fits a whole bunch of bills. Like I said, from FR to safety orange to just delineating us from or differentiating us from everyone else.
Nah, that's really cool. It pops. You're like a walking billboard. You know
there
that?
You go. Thanks,
Not to mention like the the way you speak is so unique. You got this draw about you. I'm just like, you can talk to me all day.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
So were you always in the oil business?
So my first foray into the oil and gas industry was in the summer of 1982.
Okay.
Long before you were born, but
that's all right.
I was in college and I got back actually from Washington D.C. and took a job in the oil field as a roustabout. And
what is a roustabout?
Roustabout's just a really fancy term for like oil field laborer.
Okay.
Pretty much anything they tell you to do, you do. And so
boots on, shirt off, jeans on, kicking the drill to go on the ground, oil spraying everywhere.
Whatever, picking up hoses, moving pipe, doing, all of those things that need to happen. And so that's how I started. And again, I grew up in Alaska, and so you were either sort of in the.
I did not know this.
Yeah. So
wait, where in Alaska?
In Anchorage. So,
really?
Yeah, we moved there in 1970. And of course, the world was completely different then, very remote, as you can imagine, and so we moved. My father moved the family up there from Seattle, and it was literally like the Beverly Hillbillies. Throw everybody in the truck, and away we went. And,
do you miss Alaska at all?
It's I still go back quite a bit. I have a lot of great friends up there, but it is so remote. So I would say yes and no. I mean, a great place to grow up as a kid, especially back in those days. But now there's so much activity, and certainly what we're doing and our focus here, we've got to be in the lower 48 or the continental U.S. So that's how I started in oil and gas, and then I've held lots of positions in various aspects. Just in full disclosure, I'm a recovering public servant. No, sorry, but I spent 20 years.
I'm like, 20 years. Oh, this is nice. This is getting real quick. Yeah. Where are we going? Nothing would shock me, frankly, Curtis. So go for it.
So 20 years in public service and in the port industry in the state of Washington. And during that time, my engagement in business development and project development was largely around oil and gas related projects, mostly on the refined product side.
Okay.
So, moving refined barrels or moving, gas, diesel, natural gas, things like that. And so
many people don't know, and I think you need to clarify this for them. that when oil gets pumped out of the ground, it doesn't just go directly into a vehicle or a piece of
Dang it.
machinery.
Yeah, gosh. No,
Yeah.
it's that's really a good point, Alex, or Alexander, sorry. But,
Hmm.
the oil industry is pretty huge when you think of the upstream, midstream, and downstream components of the industry. And so upstream is all about the development of the barrel, getting it out of the ground, doing all of the things that you need to do to drill the well, lift the oil out of the ground.
Hmm.
Midstream is how you get it to where it's going, right? How you
Right.
get it to some level of market. And then, of course, the downstream side is the refining and then the delivery to the gas station where you can put it in your pickup truck.
Right.
And so if you think about all of those aspects and all of the jobs that are created as a part of that and all of the opportunity for things to go bad,
Right.
number one, but also for things to go better, right? So how can we improve on that process and be more efficient, be cleaner in the things that we do? So I spent a lot of time on the downstream side, right? So on sort of getting those products to market. And then in 2012, when I was with the Port of Vancouver, USA, or America's Vancouver, and differentiated from the other Vancouver in
Hmm.
Canada. But anyway, we started doing a lot of work as the shale boom was really starting to get momentum. At that time in the Pacific Northwest, of course, the housing crash was happening all around, and it was just devastating. And so my team and I started to do a lot of work in the mid continent around the shale boom. And it's like, wow, this is completely, different than what we're dealing with back on the coast. So we started to do a lot of work there in terms of, connections on the economic development side, developing markets in China for bringing in different products to go into the oil and gas field. And then in 2014, I took a job actually running a company in the Bakken in North Dakota.
Yeah.
And in that particular role, we were servicing the upstream side. So we were servicing the drilling rigs and the frac crews and getting the holes drilled and the wells fracked and the oil out of the ground. And then also the midstream side because we were transloading barrels from coming out of the ground into rail cars because at that time the pipeline infrastructure was really inadequate. So
So out of the ground onto a train, train to destination.
train to a refinery
Right.
where it could be processed,
Where
and then
like Philadelphia, Louisiana, like
all of the above,
okay.
West Coast markets, the Gulf Coast markets, and the East Coast markets. So because every place had refineries at that time,
Hmm.
really, except for North Dakota,
Okay.
which had a few, but not enough to keep up with the amount of barrels that were being produced.
So we produce a pretty sufficient amount of oil out of the ground here in the United States. Is it
Yes.
all refined? Is what is pulled out of the ground here locally refined here locally?
Typically, yes. I mean, there are some barrels that are being shipped, overseas because they're surplus to our particular needs.
Okay.
But one of the things that I learned early on in the oil and gas industry is that a barrel of oil is not the same in Alaska as it is in North Dakota, as it is in Canada, as it is in Texas.
What do you mean, like West Texas Intermediate, like stuff like that?
So
The type of oil,
the makeup of the oil
chemically?
chemically is
Understood.
different, right? So you have different grades, you have different API gravities, which is how thick it is. But also in that are the different chemical or mineral compounds. And so with that, then based on the type of oil, refineries, if you think about it, as a finely tuned machine, are actually dialed into a specific type of crude oil to produce a specific product, whether
Okay.
it's gas or diesel, or whether it is chemicals for the pharmaceutical industry.
Certain distillates, whatever it might be.
Yeah. So every
Each refinery specializes in the type of chemicals that are inside of specific types of oil.
right,
So you
exactly.
could have a refinery, say in Louisiana or Philly, and they'll say, we actually only want to bring in this type of oil because we specialize in the production of these other chemical substances off of this raw material.
Exactly. And in order to change over to a new product, it requires like complete retooling and fine tuning of the program of the refinery, of all of the processes that are within that refining system. And so that's why, think of it like on the West Coast, for instance, is that the West Coast refineries back in the day were tuned to handle ANS, or Alaska North Slope crude oil. Because
is that the plate that's essentially holding all that oil in that area, the geography?
Well, that's so the oil drilled in Prudhoe Bay up in the North Slope, then piped down to Valdez, put onto tankers. So,
I understand. Okay.
Yeah. So because that was where their supply was sort of the most plentiful and the easiest, if you would, then, they tuned those refineries for that. They also tuned them to be able to handle other types of crude, again, to be able to make whatever their program was, whether it was gas or diesel or chemicals or kind of a combination thereof. So as these wells in Alaska were starting to decline, refineries in the West started looking for new sources of barrels, if you would, of crude. So obviously, shale oil became very attractive. But the thing about shale oil, or light sweet, is that it doesn't have.
You make it sound like corn in a field.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have the level of what they call bottoms, or the heavy ends, which is where a lot of the minerals and chemicals come from.
Right.
And so, because those
the real nectar of the earth, I would say,
because those light barrels produce a lot of like natural gas liquids, so really light natural gas, lean, obviously natural gas in the form of gas, and then gasoline and diesel. But they don't have a lot, like I said, of the bottoms or the heavies that make like asphalt or a lot of these other chemical type.
So it would be in the oil and gas industry's interest to find something that is minerally, in a mineral and chemical sense, very has a lot of depth to it. It's very rich. So the richer, that means they can pull more products out of it, and that means it can be sold more times over. Is that essentially what happens with this?
You have more markets than just gasoline and diesel, and and that's really the thing to remember. I mean, obviously, for the consumer at the pump that thinks
they don't give a shit about anything else other than the gas.
Oil comes out of the ground and goes right into my pump, right? Like you said, they sort of miss the midstream and downstream.
You got to frack it. It's got 3 different levels to it. You know what I mean?
Like how does it get here? I just put in my money and pull the lever, right? But understanding exactly where those barrels come from. And so that is part of the reason why we're still sourcing barrels from overseas, right?
Oh, because they have it's a higher richness to it.
Exactly. The makeup of the crude, the recipe of the crude, if you would, is required by that refinery to make the product stream or product mix that they need to make. And so, yes, the U.S. is energy independent, and
But in terms of products we rely on, asphalt, pharmaceutical elements, we actually need oil to come from other nations to service those industries.
Yeah, that maybe are less friendly or desirable as far as the Christmas card list goes. But we need the oil because we need that to be able to make the products that we've come so
I understand
used to,
now.
Right? So
I can see how this is all getting wrapped into itself.
Yeah, so
you're telling me the asphalt I see on the ground is thanks to like the Russians or some other group?
Well, a lot of it comes from Canada. The heavy ends come from Canada. A lot of the really thick oil, the API gravity oil that's like less than 10, which is essentially like tar, and you have to heat it up. I just got back from Bakersfield, California, and out on the coast in Santa Barbara County. That oil is very much the same. It's very thick. In fact, it's so thick that they need to steam it. They need to literally inject steam into the
there's
formations.
A separation into this thing because it's getting pumped out to separate elements because it's so thick.
No, they just need to get that to be able to make it move. It's so
really
thick. Yeah, I mean, it's
it's a thick goo.
If you spill a barrel on the ground, you pick it up with a shovel, right? I mean,
get the hell out of here.
Yeah, I mean, it's that thick. It's like, have you ever seen tar for your roof? I mean, it's sort of the same kind of type of viscosity. So again, but then there's barrels in North Dakota or down in the Permian Basin, where I came from this morning, where you could damn near put it right in your pickup truck and run it and go, right?
It's
I mean,
wild.
it's that light, right?
Yeah, that's totally wild. So throughout your, there's a lot of elements going on here. Throughout your history, your personal and professional history, you said that you were also bringing in your products from the Chinese to help with, was that with refining here in the US, or was that with actually drilling out of the ground?
It was actually for fracking. So,
Oh, for fracking.
yeah.
Okay.
So in the Pacific Coast ports, we were very engaged in the development of the Chinese ceramic sand market. And so the ceramic sand it literally is sand,
Yeah.
but it had a higher crush strength as opposed to regular like silica sand.
Okay.
And where that became important was in hydraulic fracking, when you needed high, very deep wells, very high pressure.
Is that the casings they would put in there?
So you would put the casing in,
Yeah.
and then you would blow holes in the casing, and
That's
then you would
correct.
frack the formation.
Right.
But in order to keep the formation open, you needed to pressure pump sand into it
Mm-hmm.
to keep the cracks open. Well, of course, the cracks at that depth, 10,000 plus
Ton
feet,
of pressure.
ton of pressure. So what was happening is that they found that this Chinese ceramic sand had the better performance. Of course, it was higher dollars, and so for the Pacific ports, that's was one of the products that we really got into, because great trade with the Pacific Rim, in the Pacific ports. And that's what got me specifically into North Dakota to start, was the development of that marketplace. Then, of course, as the market fell out and oil crashed in 2015 into 2016, then the market decided that, well, that stuff's too expensive, so we're just going to use natural sand like we've been using the silica sand out of the Iron Range up in Wisconsin.
But you wouldn't get the same sort of.
They just put more in. So what they
That's
did is
yeah.
what they did is they had more, they increased the number of stages of fracking they did, and they increased the amount of sand that they put in.
Okay.
And so, similar to what we talked about earlier in a well life cycle, the hydraulically fractured wells, sort of this new era of production, those tend to have a really high initial production rate and then a
low after.
pretty steep decline thereafter.
Do you know what it reminds me of? Like carbon filters for your water.
Sure.
Awesome in the beginning. Awesome. Water's so good. And then it just really starts to taper off because you're packing essentially more shit into it over time.
Yeah, exactly.
So the value is not going to be as good, and it's not going to produce as much, especially you have to overstuff this thing underground.
Yeah.
So when the public looks at oil, right, oil and gas, they don't like it, but they're 100% reliant on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just one of those weird things, right?
It's kind of like a moped, I guess, right?
How so, Curtis?
Well, like you need it to get somewhere, but you just don't want to see anybody watching you ride it, right?
Yeah, it's like, I don't really look good on this, you know what I mean? But it does get me to work.
Yeah.
Did something change for you personally where you're like, man, the business, definitely in the upstream part, is a dirty business. Everything about it's dirty. Okay? Where you get the oil from, how you get it out of the ground, the dangers behind even drilling that stuff. I mean, I'm sure you've seen some horrible, field accidents that have occurred over your career. What was the impetus for you to say, I need to do something that helps right essentially some of the wrongs of this business? And you had just mentioned a couple minutes ago that wells have a lifespan.
Sure.
People don't know this. They think it just infinitely gets pumped out of the ground. But what you're saying is that if I go to a place where someone says, hey, there's oil here, a geologist tells me that probably under here you're going to strike something good. We tap it, we put the Christmas tree on the thing, we start pulling the oil up. There's a life expectancy of this thing. Now, I would like you to explain, and then we're going to get into well done, but I'd like you to explain how do you determine the life of something? And then as a whole, what does the lifespan of everything look like? Because we've been pumping oil for a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
What does the overall lifespan of our oil life here in the U.S. currently look like too?
Sure. Well, start on an individual well basis, and you're right. Every well has a life cycle, and a lot of that is estimated. Initially from sort of doing these reservoir estimates, and even though every well still is going to operate or function a little bit differently, it might be in a different part of the formation. It might be, a lot of people think that. Oil production is like sticking a straw in a juice box, right?
That's what I'm saying. That's the whole idea that people
Yeah.
have.
And you just start pulling out of the straw until the juice box is empty. But in many cases, and that is the case in some reservoirs, but in other formations, and especially in this tight oil play or the shale oil play, the producing zones are a lot more defined, right? A lot
Okay.
smaller. So you have to really be precise and exact. But I don't care whether you're pulling out of the juice box or you're working in a like a shale type of a situation. Every well has a life cycle. And so what happens during the life cycle of the production of the well, the actual well itself or the leases associated with those wells are often traded, sold, transferred.
So,
Um,
so ownership over the space and the life of the well goes from hand to hand to hand.
Absolutely. So it may start out in the hands of a major, like
Okay.
like a super major.
Oh, and then a secondary business will come in that's less of them. They'll try and produce from it because they can essentially purchase it at a discount.
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
the well gets transacted multiple times over from first day to last day, right?
Okay.
And what tends to happen, of course, as the well production declines, then the cost to produce the well either stays the same or goes up, but it doesn't matter because at some point you're going to have an intersection, right?
Mhm.
And at that intersection is a point where your well becomes uneconomical. And so what happens and what needs to happen, and it doesn't always happen, but is there needs to be front end planning for end of life, similar to what we deal with every day, right? As we have aging parents, or
Human beings, we see it
yeah,
all the time. You should
we're
plan for their care, right, as we age.
precisely. And but what happens in the oil and gas industry is that hasn't always been the case. So as these wells transact,
Okay.
right? They transfer, they're assigned, whatever the program is. There is legally binding contracts that then transfer the liability from one party to the other, right?
Wild.
So you go from big oil, which again, everybody likes to blame big oil for all of this. But the reality is that the problem that we find ourselves in now, especially around the orphan well problem, is that this didn't come from big oil. They may have drilled the well to start with, but the problems are really kind of from the tier 4 or 5 mom and pop oil, and that's really the problem. Is you get down to that end of life cycle, and there's just no money to plug these wells.
But does that family or that tier 4 and 5 still hold the liability on essentially this dead well?
Yep, absolutely. But
Now they don't. Do they have the resources in their own respects as a tier 4 or 5 to do anything with it?
some may not,
Okay.
and it's kind of really driven by the individuals. And what happens, just like in any industry, is that the actions of a few bad players sort of taint it for everybody,
How
right?
so? Give me an example.
Well, think of somebody who has a jacked up pickup truck, a big black Ford F-350. Not mentioning any names, but they
Don't look at me.
they drive around the neighborhood and they've got their truck tuned so they can go out and they can roll coal,
Roll call.
right?
Yep, I know.
They're rolling coal up and down the block, and then here I come in my black Ford F-350, and I get painted by the same brush, right?
That's correct.
So it's the actions of these few then that can reflect poorly back on the industry, and that's what we've seen. And the oil and gas industry right now currently is certainly one of, if not the most, certainly one of the most heavily regulated industries in the world, right?
That's right.
That's because there's a lot of eyes on it, right? But what's happened is that has really come as a result of a few players doing some shady stuff and not really using best practices.
Okay.
And so unfortunately, it's just like I said, it's reflected poorly on the entire industry. For me, when I sort of the pivot point for me,
This
right?
is what I want to know.
Yeah. So for me, that inflection point happened on July 25th of 2019. And I was actually up in northern Montana,
Mhm.
up about 15 miles from the Canadian border. And I was up there talking to some farmers about shipping grain to Pacific ports through an inland port that I represented as a consultant.
Okay.
So we were up there walking around. It was a beautiful day, and July 25th. Of course, about that time, light it stays really light late in Montana,
Very light.
and so we're out there, and we came across this like pile of oil field trash in the middle of this beautiful wheat field, and I'm like, well, what the heck is that? And the farmer's like, oh, that's an orphan well, and he's like, look around, they're everywhere up here. And that initial sort of impact that this had on me was like, it wasn't, oh my God, this is the end of the world. It was like, holy crap, this is ugly.
Yep.
And shame on whoever that left that behind, because that just looks terrible. And so what I came to learn after that, and again, that was early in the day on the 25th, and then as I spent the rest of the day out there in the field, you just kept seeing. Once you see one, you see them all.
Right.
And it was this image, or these images, that I couldn't get out of my mind. It was not only the oil field trash left behind, the impact of the farmers who had to like play dodgeball around this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was also, you could smell gas, you could smell H2S, you could smell these gases coming out of the ground.
There's fumigants coming out of these things in the middle of these beautiful farms. Now, you and I both know, I've been to Montana. You've been to Montana. It is absolutely, totally fucking stunning.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Beautiful place. Very raw place. But in the midst of where these people have their livelihoods and where they're growing these grains, right, and doing their farming, someone had came and used the land and essentially just left it.
Correct.
It was pillaged for what it was, and then there was no thought as to the cleanup after the fact.
Yeah. And it was, for me, that was the moment, right? And so that night, as I was driving from Shelby back to Bozeman, which is about a 4-hour drive, I couldn't get that image out of my mind. And so I started to, as I'm driving back to Bozeman at 85 miles an hour on
Sounds about right.
Interstate 15, which is legal.
Yep.
But I started to look at orphan wells, and then, but literally, by the time I got back to Bozeman at 1 a.m, had the domain name secured for well done, had registered the business with the state of Montana.
Yeah.
Actually had the framework of a business plan, and had absolutely no idea where I was going. Right. All I knew was that somebody needed to do something.
Why do you even care?
Well, that was it.
No, right? I'm asking you. Like, people drive around all day. There's trash everywhere. You see litter. And most of the people, and I've said this many times, even to my wife, I said, someone should pick that up. And then I asked myself,
why don't you pick it up?
Why the hell do I not just pick it up?
Right, exactly.
This is exactly my point. Is this one of those moments for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you've had experience in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
You go around and you see this and like, no one's solving this. I can solve this.
Yeah. And for me at the time, it was, whether it was a calling or a curse, you know what I mean? And you could, on any given day, I could argue both directions. But, for me, it was like, you need to do something, right?
Uh-huh.
And again, I had no idea what I was going to do, but somebody needed to do something. And oftentimes, at least in my experience, it's been, if you at least do something, right?
Yeah.
Like to try to make it better. You may not hit it out of the park. You may strike out, but at least you're doing something, right? Versus sitting back and doing nothing. And that's really been, for us, that's been the foundation. And as I learned about orphan wells back in 2019, it was like, oh my God, this is huge. 3 million plus orphan wells. So that's where we adopted the one well at a time motto, right? Because the only way to make an impact is to take action. And the way to stay motivated is to just celebrate every one of these little victories and not focus on the overwhelming numbers that were out there, right?
So you have 3.5 million orphan wells in the U.S.
Right.
Okay. You have 200,000 plus wells that are going out of their life cycle. They're past the inflection point. What have you learned through this process, apart from the fact that you have to pick up the trash, okay, and it's a mess? That's stage one. But that had to have evolved in your mind. It's like, okay, not only am I cleaning up the site, but was there any other ways? Like, so these fumigants, is that something that needed to be managed also?
Yeah, come to find out that was really that was in terms of health impact and environmental impact. Certainly, the trash on the surface and just the ugliness to the eye, and having to dodge around all this stuff, that was problematic. But in terms of the impact to the world in which we live, and really thinking about leaving things better, it was really taking a look at that. And at the time when I started in 2019, the publicly available data on methane emissions or emissions from orphan wells was really slim to none, and it was significantly understated. And I came to find that really quickly, because as I started in the early days doing our due diligence, or my due diligence and my testing on these wells, it was like a head scratcher. I'm like, well, either I'm doing this wrong, which again, we were writing the book, so there wasn't really a lot of guidance. There was no, you couldn't go YouTube, how to do this. I mean, you can now, because you can go watch our YouTube videos.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But we started this whole program about, well, how do we really determine what the volume of gas is? And so as I started to see this, and I started to report back to EPA Region 8 in Denver, they were like, fuck, you're an idiot. You're doing it wrong. It can't be like that. Can't be that bad.
All right, hold on. We got to give some context here. You're telling me you're out there, really no idea like the extent that these things are leaking. All right. And when you start to measure it, you start capturing readings, and you're like, okay, I got these readings, and you send it over to the Environmental Protection Agency, Denver office. Mm-hmm. And they're like, there's no way you were doing this correctly, because what? Were the readings too high?
Yeah, because what I was calculating was the flow was like orders of magnitude above what was publicly available in the data from the EPA.
And how long had the EPA been publishing data saying that this is just essentially what the flow rate is?
Yeah. So orphan wells, again, remember a couple things that are unique about orphan wells. The first is they were for sure at that time, everyone's dirty little secret. Like nobody wanted to talk about orphan wells, because like the states didn't want to talk about them because it reflected poorly on their management and enforcement.
Yes.
Right. The oil and gas industry didn't want to talk about it because it was a black eye on them, because they're the ones that ultimately left this, steaming pile of poop behind.
Right.
And there was no money in most of the states to be able to deal with this problem. So it sort of got, tamped down. And so the real orphan well data started coming out in, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16. So there wasn't a lot of deep data there, because, again, nobody really – remember, methane wasn't even really a focus at that point in time. It didn't really start to come on, the global warming potential and the gnarliness, if you would, about what it's been doing for centuries, or a century and a half.
So compound social, political, environmental factors started to come in and say, hey – it's probably important that we get some readings on these things.
Right. And then when Curtis, the hillbilly from Montana, came in and started to show
on his moped.
Yeah, my moped, started to show them the data we were collecting. They were like, it can't be right. It can't be right. Well, and so I just kept going, because, it is right. I mean, I can do math too, right? I mean, come on. And so we just figured, look, maybe in Montana is an anomaly, right? Maybe these wells, but these wells had no well control at the surface. These were literally open pipes that were casing that was venting gas directly to the atmosphere.
How long have they been like that?
At least 30 years.
You're telling me for 30 plus years, there's an open hole into the ground, leaking out things that are actively having negative consequence on our environment
and on our health. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Because you don't want to be huffing that stuff in. That's not good for you. Right.
Yeah. Because in the in the spectrum of the gas.
Well, let's go over that. What is in the spectrum of the gas? So what is being released here?
So you have things like certainly CO2, but you
Yep.
have methane, you have hexane,
Any bromines in there?
pentane,
Yep.
propane. You have H2S gas that's coming out, and it varies from well to well, and
Yeah.
it also varies from well to well in the concentrations. But what's important to understand is that it's more than just methane. It's all of these other gases that are just really not good for you.
That bind to things, and you do not want them binding to other organic material.
Yeah, and so it's this whole, play of understanding what's happening in your neighborhood or what's happening, sort of outside and around you. And so for us, as we started to do this work early, so remember, this was in July of 2019.
Okay.
By September of 2019, we had started, but when I say we, I mean literally my wife and I, Stacy and I.
You both did this as a pair, went out and started measuring these things, cleaning up?
Yeah. So we started adopting wells. And when we...
All you other married couples out there, learn from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those who measure together stay together. But,
yeah.
Anyway, so we started adopting wells, and so when you adopt a well, what that means is that first of all, in Montana and most states, you have to actually post a cash bond, and then you assume all of the liability to plug and abandon and put that well away. So you essentially buy the right to assume all of the financial liability for putting that well away.
But also gives you the ability to go in and do what needs to be done to close it up.
Exactly, and to be able to study the well, because the program is that nobody wants just a bunch of knuckleheads out there running around, putting stuff down the hole that's going to potentially exacerbate the issue or make the plugging cost more expensive, right? Because you drop something down the hole. So we started adopting wells in September of 2019. By April of 2020, and remember, now we're full COVID, right? So as we were adopting wells, as we were measuring wells during that time period, I could tell right away that we needed a financial strategy to help scale this work up that would help to supplement our car washes and bake sales. Right?
Sure.
Because this stuff was expensive and there was a whole lot of them, and we needed a way to figure this out. So that's when we started to pursue the methane component and looking at developing a carbon credit from methane gas.
Makes sense.
The problem was at that time is that the carbon market was full on nature based, right? Like it was all about trees and, farming and, stoves in Africa and all this stuff. When I approached the big
ACR,
first was Vera, and then the gold standard, and then finally ACR.
Yeah.
But when I first approached them, they were looked at me like I was from outer space. Well, because nobody wanted to have anything to do with the oil and gas industry, right?
Yeah, but they don't realize that this thing is like a cow that's farting 24/7.
Yeah.
With a bunch of other stuff that the cow shouldn't be eating, setting up in the atmosphere, and there's 3.5 million of them just in the United States.
Yeah, and they're all doing this to varying levels, and so luckily the ACR, when we finally got to them, and they were the third, so I was getting pretty wore out and sort of discouraged at that point. Remember, front end of COVID, we were trying to raise money during that time period too, and as you can imagine, trying to get venture capitalists to try to cut loose with some cash during the onset of COVID, which was perceived as the end of the world, right? There was nothing. I mean, it was there were some dollars available, but we called it mob money. I mean, it was just ridiculous rates. So when we finally got to the ACR, they got it. And what they got was the fact that because we're a nonprofit, that our driver to plug these wells was not the bottom line. It was really doing the right thing, right? And using whatever we could generate in terms of carbon credits or carbon offsets from the plugging of the well to help support the plugging of the well, not to have to to carry the full day, right?
That's
Not to
correct.
underwrite the whole project. And so we were the original sponsor back in 2020. Others had joined after that, but we were the ones that broke the ground, that came in with the crazy idea of, hey, let's use carbon finance as a tool here. But also we started plugging wells in April of 2020. Like, we plugged our first well on Earth Day of 2020.
Love that.
Yeah, and we've been plugging wells ever since. We're just getting ready to plug our 44th next week in Ohio.
Do you have an idea of how much you've actually sequestered?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Yeah, what is that?
Literally millions of tons of CO2e, or carbon dioxide equivalent.
Tons?
Millions of tons.
Tons.
Millions of tons, yes.
2,000 pounds.
Yes. So in the carbon market, so a carbon credit is based on one CO2e, which is a carbon dioxide equivalent, 1 ton of CO2e. Right?
Okay.
And so every greenhouse gas has a different multiplier.
Makes sense. Yeah, depending on like how much of an effect it has on the actual environment.
Right. And there is a multiplier for methane, the IPCC, which is the United Nations Interplanetary Commission on Climate Change.
They drilling oil on the moon?
Wait, it's
Venus?
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
It stands for something else, but
Yeah.
Anyway. But they've assigned all of these values to the different gases. So methane, in the 20-year horizon, methane has an 84x multiplier.
Right.
In the 100-year program, it has like a 28x multiplier. Because, for you and me and Dupree, everybody in the party here, our focus is 20 years, right? Like,
sure.
100 years is great. But
you're going to be too old to cap wells in 20 years, my friend.
But really, we really need to be focused on the 20-year horizon. And
yeah, what am I going to do past 20 years? If we can't solve it before then, are you joking? What are we going to have left?
Right, exactly.
I'm going to be huffing tar.
Well, and think about, for me, the sobering fact is, if you look at those wells, like I mentioned in Montana, that had been wide open for 30 years.
Yes.
There are other wells that were back in the day when this stuff was first happening. They didn't even necessarily flare the gas. They just let the gas rip to the atmosphere.
Oh, good.
And so you think about the thousands and hundreds of thousands and literally millions of wells that were drilled across the U.S., the standard of care. And again, it's not because these guys were criminals. It's just because they didn't have the best practices, right?
Right.
Like in any industry, there's always this evolution of best practice, right? So we can't, yes, things weren't great there, but, there's lots of other industries where things weren't great either. So careful about throwing rocks in glass houses, right?
Right.
But for the oil and gas industry, this notion of doing better and leaving things better than the way that we found them, and being better
stewards
today. Yeah, it's all about stewardship. And for us, that's been our driver from day one, is how do we not only, start to solve this problem, but also generate narrative and bring attention to this issue, which nobody wants to talk about. Remember, this is 2020. Still nobody wants to talk about this, right?
Right.
And so through our actions and the Well Done Foundation, if you go onto our website and you look in the media page, it's got sort of a chronological history there of all of the coverage that, our organization has received from day one. And it's been amazing and a true blessing how much of attention we've been able to shine into this area. Now, I would tell you that with that came a lot of criticism to us, to myself, from the industry. Not so much from the majors, because the majors understood that, they get it. They're under a ton of pressure to improve and do better. But a lot of the mom and pops and a lot of the sort of the lower tier operators.
Well, they're like, Curtis is making it more expensive for us.
Right. Stop shining light in the closet.
Yeah, exactly. How do you define that narrative? It has to be done first. The carbon credit industry, little murky.
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
People try and make stuff up all the time. People are trying to apply blockchain to it. People want to verify, from ground to mouth, essentially, how things get from A to B.
Sure.
For you, you've been pioneering this thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Especially around the well capping business here in the United States, 3.5 million orphan wells. How do you tell the story with the data itself? Because it's one thing for you to say, hey, I'm going out there and I'm capping it. People are like, well, so what? How do we actually know it's doing something? What's the process? There's a measurement tool, right?
Sure.
It requires people. And then what actually are you cataloging so that people can see with historical record, this is what's been going on?
You bet. No, and so I'll just go to the punchline first. And so for the carbon market with orphan wells, the bottom line is it's literally gas on, gas off, right?
Okay.
Like we're showing through the data collection the amount of gas that's on before the well is plugged. So the amount of flow and the concentration of the gas, which then gives you the calculation to come up with the tons.
Okay.
Right?
So you need flow rate.
Flow and concentration.
Okay. And concentration. And also knowing the type of gas.
Well, right.
Yeah.
So our focus is methane because
Right.
we just take that one gas and that's the one that we calculate against, even though there's other gnarlies that are in that gas stream.
Yeah, because over the 20, this gives this multiplier and it's probably the most effective for getting the cost payback towards the actual well capping itself, right?
Precisely. Yep.
Got it.
So we go through a lengthy process of measuring those wells on multiple occasions. Some wells we've got a whole lot of data on, just because of how long we've been doing this. But typically, it's a process of showing the data pre-plugging, plugging the well, and then showing the data after the well's been plugged, which is zero, right? So it's pretty easy.
Pre, during, and post.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Okay, and then with that, you actually get a story through the data itself, which you can then report upon.
Absolutely. And that's part of what then is used under the methodology, then to do the scientific backup. That's also, remember, we started this back in 2020, plugged our first well in 2020.
Yeah.
We started immediately showing the data and showing those examples. And that's what, like I said, the folks from the EPA Region 8 came back and said, oh, you're crazy. That can't be. Right? No way. It's too much. Right.
Yeah. Well, guess what, guys? You're wrong.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I'm just all I can do is what I know, and this is what we're showing.
Yeah, no, for sure. So then, throughout this process here, you start essentially putting together this storybook on each of the wells. And to speak about like this orphan profile itself, it comes with all the data, where it's located. Like, are those all the elements? Not only the flow rates, things you do for capturing for the ACR, but are there pictures associated with it, like locations here? And do you have a target list of ones that you want to continue to attack in the future?
Sure. So we put a record together of a history of that well. And some, every well, and this is the cool part, every well has a history. Every well has a story to tell, right?
Okay.
The first wells we started on were up in northern Montana, drilled in the 1920s, right?
Wow.
Early 1920s. So if you look at the wells, the first well we plugged was called the Big West Anderson number 3. That well was drilled in the 20s, and it was a part of the Big West refining system. And what happened during that time, and you start to look at some of the historical information of the farms that they were working with, the farmers they were working with, it was because of those wells and it was because of those refineries that they actually generated economic vitality for the region that helped to build the country, helped to bring in roads and power and build communities and schools.
It's more than just the well. It's everything secondary, tertiary of it.
Yeah. So we wanted to be able, in fairness, we wanted to make sure that we were telling the whole story, right?
Very cool.
The Well Done Foundation, we're hopefully very careful about sort of staying in the middle ground, right? Like just staying on the high road. It's not up to us to fling poo and point fingers and talk trash about the industry, or
I'll do that for you.
Yeah, I mean, others will certainly for sure, and then also not to hop on the to be going too far the other direction on the environmental side, because life is a balance, right? Like you said earlier in our conversation, we need fossil fuels to get through our day, right?
Yep.
This is how it is. Now, can we do better? Hell yes.
Oh, yeah.
And we will, and we are. But, so you got to find that balance. So our whole point at the Well Done Foundation is to just go fix the problem. I tell people this all day, every day. Like, we're in the get shit done business.
Love it.
That's our program. We just go measure wells, come up with, work with partners to find financing to finance these projects, and then plug the well, and then hopefully transact the credits. But again, that doesn't, like we're doing well projects right now that have 0 credits. The project that we're doing out in California is really a community focused project. It's got very little in terms of carbon impact, but a huge impact from a community perspective.
So for you, you're actually developing one of the first indices here in the United States on orphan well capping.
Mhm.
So for you, because you've been capturing this flow rate, this data, having teams out there going out, posting the bonds, assuming liability, sticking your neck out there, you have actually been able to pull together this data that people thought didn't exist.
Right.
It was having a very direct, measurable negative impact on our environment and our health. And you are one by one attacking these things.
Yep.
You're doing it in good measure.
Mhm.
How do you know you've done a good job on a well?
Well, the numbers don't lie, right? It's literally back to gas on, gas off.
Sure.
We can calculate, here was the flow and the tons that were happening before we did our work, and here's what's happening now. And you can quickly calculate those impacts. And so what's awesome, and back to the one well at a time approach, is that every well is a celebration, right? Every well has an impact, maybe high, maybe low, but every well makes a difference.
Sure.
And so if there's a message for us to get out to people, it's number one, you got to take action. You got to stop the truck, get out and pick up the garbage.
Yep.
But then also our hope is that by us doing what we do, we inspire others to do something similar. Not everybody has to plug a well, but everybody should try to do something to leave this place better, right? For the next guys coming along behind us. And that's really, I think, at the core of the well done message is just do something, for God's sake, right?
Something is better than nothing.
Yeah. I mean, you may not get it right?
No, but at least you're trying.
Yeah. Exactly.
How are we supposed to evolve unless we try?
Well, and we, look, man, we've been at this for going on 4.5 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, we made more mistakes and had more strikeouts than, I mean, it is the quintessential entrepreneur story here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, leveraging our, life savings, if you would, to adopt wells. I mean, fuck, who does that shit?
Insane.
Right?
I have actually no idea.
Yeah. I mean, think about luckily my wife, God bless her, is a good soul and, is 100% behind the program, because she'd be like, you're crazy. I'm going to, divorce your ass and take my half right now. Right. So, but anyway.
So, all right. So, we're coming up on an hour here. What do you, at the end of all this, outside of well done, put that to the side for a second, you as a human being, you're on your deathbed, family's around you. What do you want? Like, how do you want to feel and think about all of these things that you have achieved?
Well,
I'm serious. Yeah. You don't have to be plugging wells.
Right.
You don't have to care about the environment. What are you trying to do here, Curtis? What is this?
I mean, for me, it is about leaving a legacy, and a legacy of impact, right? That people, people's lives. Remember, I've spent, a lot of time in my career doing things that, maybe didn't have a huge impact on others in a positive way. I think that this does. And for me, that's why I'm so passionate about doing this work, is because I want others to see the value in leaving an impact or leaving a legacy. And it's not about, filling up your bank account and, making a ton of money and driving a great car and living in a great house. Look, for me, it's just about getting by so I can go, measure another well, adopt another well, right? And I tell people all the time I have a well plugging problem, right?
You do.
I do.
Some people got gambling problems.
Yeah, I do. I got more wells than sense, right?
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively. But, for me on my deathbed, I want, I want that legacy to stand. And, my family, our behind me in this project, and I think they understand the importance of it. And it's really about just bringing attention of what one individual can do if they set their mind to it. Because if I can do it, for goodness gracious sakes, anybody else can do it, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
no rocket scientist. I just was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time, and got the memo, I guess, right?
I should be able to say some nice words at your funeral then.
I hope so.
Yeah, you
that'd
don't
be
have to
good.
worry about that. So for everyone that has been listening here, where can they go and find out more about Well Done Foundation?
Would love it if you guys go to our website at www.welldonefoundation.org. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. We also have a series on the interwebs called, this is Curtis Shuck, the Carbon Wildcat. And so anyway, we have that. That's been taken off here this year.
Love it.
So a lot of that going on.
Can people donate?
Oh, please. I mean, that's how we get by, right?
Okay.
I mean, we talk about car washes and bake sales, and, yes, carbon credits are great, but that's a really long lead time.
Sure.
80% of our work is funded by individuals who are given $10 or less a month, right?
Super.
And so what we do is we aggregate those dollars, and like I said, because I have a well plugging problem, as soon as I get enough money, we go plug another well.
No, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Anything else that you want to share with the group here while we're on the air?
Well, it's a team sport, and I think the message again is that everybody can do something, and everybody really needs to do something. Think beyond yourself and beyond your little sphere of universe, and think about leaving this place better for the next people.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, great to see you.